Yes, Anna and everybody, good morning and welcome to this exciting third day. I must say that it's one of the most riveting conferences I've ever been part of and I've ever attended. And I feel that the care and appropriateness with which the papers have also been put into these individual sessions is truly satisfying. And so I cannot wait to hear the papers in my session 8. I would like to give the word over to Sarah Runnstrom now. Sarah, I'm excited to hear Sarah's paper, which has the title Birth as a Vital Existential Condition in the Philosophy of Hannah Arendt and Paul Ricoeur. Sarah has a BA in Philosophy and Film Studies from the University of Glasgow and a Master's in Religion from Lund University. She just finished an interfaith studies program in Japan, where she had opportunity to further her research interests in existential theology, hermeneutics, and embodiment and hope. So I'm very excited, Sarah, to hear your paper. Go ahead.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And thank you so much to all the organizers of this symposium. It's been really fascinating to take part, and I'm impressed of the wonderful perspectives that have been brought together on so many different topics. So thank you for that. Let me just share my screen here. All right. So I'll be presenting on birth as a vital existential concept in the work of Hannah Arendt and Paul Ricoeur. The aim of this presentation is to contribute to the growing reflection on birth within contemporary existential thought. By attending to Arendt's concept of natality, the condition of having been born, and the phenomenological and hermeneutic treatment of birth in Ricoeur's work, I propose that we can uncover birth as a vital existential ground for hope. More specifically, I argue that birth, as representing both a site for novelty and embodied interrelation, invites a rethinking and re-narrating of identity and responsibility. This reconception holds ethical implications and possibilities. I'll begin by examining Ricoeur's critique of death-focused existentialism, his interaction with the concept of birth, and its relation to his notions of embodiment and narrative identity. This will be followed by a dive into Arendt's political reframing of birth as the ground of action and novelty. Through drawing on their shared, though distinct perspectives, I aim to demonstrate how birth can be reclaimed as a creative and hopeful horizon for existential and ethical thought. So let us begin with Ricoeur. Ricoeur challenges the centrality of death in existential thought. So while he's influenced by Heidegger's Being in Time, Ricoeur critiques Heidegger's view that authenticity is achieved through a solitary confrontation with one's own finitude. He attempts to reorientate this inward turn in Heidegger, which he considers to withdraw from the social, from history, and from embodied life. Ricoeur, in contrast, grounds the anguish of death in our relational and interdependent existence. In his essay, True and False Anguish, he introduces death as a vital anguish, a form of anxiety not born out of an abstract anticipation of one's own end, but from a profound desire to live in the world with others. The primary encounter with death for Ricoeur is the actual lived experience of the death of the other. The death of the other is not only a future possibility to be reckoned with, but a concrete, emotionally charged event that wounds the self and reveals both the fragility and interdependence of human existence. This shift is crucial because our fear of death is not comprehended in existential isolation for Ricoeur, but it entails the loss of the world and the loss of the other, which means that knowledge of our own finitude becomes meaningful within the context of this relational world. In this way, Ricoeur reframes the existential confrontation with death is not only a confrontation with nothingness, but the breakdown of relationality. This reorientation supports a consideration of birth, not as a passive biological beginning, but as a lived, embodied presence shared with others. If death wounds our relational bonds, then birth for Ricoeur becomes the original site, the original and continuous site of those bonds. In Fallible Man and the Symbolism of Evil, Ricoeur reflects on the existential implications of birth as a pre-reflective grounding of selfhood and agency. Birth is the origin of our openness to the world, our capacity to reflect, and our being in relation. He claims that prior to identifying ourselves as distinct to others, as individual or isolated beings, our carnal presence in the world is characterized by an initial openness that is deeply entangled with the world, and which is then subsequently redefined as the boundaries of our own finite existence are set. According to Ricoeur, a meditation on birth can reconnect us to an initial or pre-reflective openness. And through more deeply recognizing the relational and embodied web that we are entangled within, there emerges a possibility to widen the scope of our isolated sense of identity. We can then challenge the strict boundary between self and other and self and world. Ricoeur argues that birth in this way reveals a primordial yes to existence, an openness and hence an affirmation of life that precedes reflection. This yes represents a widening of the self, a movement beyond the boundaries of isolation. Where Heidegger's being towards death directs the self inward, Ricoeur's meditation on birth turns the self outwards, towards the relational and the embodied. It represents in this way a joyful recognition of a love for life. Through this lens, identity is not a static essence, but constantly unfolding in response to the world and with others, as well as in relation to our own memories, experiences, and personal histories. Through a deeper meditation on birth, we can reimagine our identities and expand their narrative borders to incorporate a deeper sense of relational dependence on others, and also an increased gratitude towards existence. This in turn opens up for new modes of responsibility and ethical action. While Ricoeur's emphasis lies on subjectivity and narrative expansion of self when it comes to birth, Arendt turns to the public and political dimensions of existence in her engagement with birth. In The Human Condition, she positions natality, not mortality, as central to human existence. Natality is not merely the fact of being born, but the capacity to begin, to introduce something new into the world. For Arendt, every birth is a break in the history of life, an interruption of what already exists. What is key, however, is that this interruption does not happen in isolation. Natality is always exercised within a shared world, among others, and within a web of pre-existing relationships and histories. So while natality signifies a possibility for novelty and spontaneity, it is not one that is purely self-originating. It is one situated within a condition of coexistence. This, I think, is a crucial point in Arendt's thought that deepens our understanding of the existential possibilities of birth. It shows that novelty is possible, but it does not emerge from a void. It emerges from within a co-inhabited world. It is precisely because we are engaged in histories, institutions, languages, and relationships that our capacity to begin anew has significance. Arendt's concept of natality therefore brings to light a form of novelty that emerges within a plural world that is both fragile and transformative. Arendt also highlights, like Ricoeur, that our actions allow for our identity to be narrated. However, she is more specifically considers the reception of our actions by others in the public sphere as determining the stories of our lives, the way our actions are witnessed through the eyes of spectators. In Ricoeur's hermeneutics, this interdependence is embodied and informs our narrative self-identities, both from a personal and an outward-looking perspective. In Arendt's political thought, it's our impact on the world, perceived through the eyes of others, that becomes a central narrative focus. Arendt has, of course, been critiqued for this externally focused account of narrative action, and scholars such as Judith Butler, Adrienne Rich, and Wendy Brown have argued that Arendt's privileging of spontaneous visible acts in the public realm can exclude perspectives of the marginalized, silenced, or structurally disempowered. One reason for this is that an external spectorial standpoint cannot adequately account for the complexities and intricacies of life, which are deeply embodied, relational, and often shaped by invisible forms of suffering. In this sense, plurality can function to override the uniqueness rather than complement it, through overshadowing certain voices and negating rather than affirming their uniqueness. In contrast, Ricoeur's emphasis on interpretive process as subjective and mediated through lived experience can offer a more inclusive and dynamic framework by granting more power to subjective authorship as informed by memory, trauma, and marginality. Through grounding the self in a historically situated embodiedness, he can accommodate for a broader range of voices and experiences, especially those excluded from the political stage. His phenomenological approach hence reshapes the relationship between narrative and action, enabling a deeper engagement with the personal, ethical, and historical dimensions of how individuals and communities make sense of their own past. In this way, Ricoeur more deeply affirms uniqueness than Arendt does. Despite this, I do not believe that Ricoeur's view should replace Arendt's. Rather, it can expand and deepen her conception of the uniqueness of each person. This collaboration offers a more contextualized understanding of the various frameworks through which novelty and political action can emerge. This complements, of course, the work of scholars like Caballero, who have taken Arendt in a similar direction. And as the work of Dr. Barbara Renzi just beautifully and eloquently explained. So at this point, I would like to suggest that Ricoeur and Arendt together offer a powerful existential orientation. Instead of confronting the self with death in isolation, they both direct attention to the interdependence of life. In both cases, an emphasis on birth provides an alternative to the individualistic and often isolating tone of death-focused existentialism. Birth highlights not only our dependence on others, but our capacity to transform that dependence into solidarity, responsibility, and ethical action. So by bringing together Arendt and Ricoeur, we can therefore take a bigger step towards static accounts of identity or agency, and towards a deeper understanding of the self that is centered around interdependence and also imaginative renewal, while comprehending also the many structural and embodied complexities and inequalities that must frame such a renewal. While there are, of course, distinctions in their philosophical aims and focus, their convergence with regard to birth open space for a hopeful vision of political and personal transformation, one where the capacity to begin again is rooted not in autonomy, but in personal and historically, personal and historically and socially situated, and open to otherness and the ongoing creative possibilities of human life. One that through Ricoeur is grounded also in an affirmation of life, a yes to life rather than its negation. The hope which emerges from this view is not escapist. It doesn't reject finitude, and it doesn't project a utopian vision. Rather, it is a way of inhabiting limitation with a kind of grounded and careful optimism and perhaps joy, located in the belief that something new can emerge precisely because we are not isolated, because we are connected and embedded. So thinkers like Judith Butler and Adriana Cavarero have already built upon Arendt's insights to explore how relationality forms a core ethical core of political life. Integrating into Ricoeur into this framework not only strengthens Arendt's political vision, but also resonates with and builds upon the work of these scholars, who similarly critique solitary models of subjectivity in favor of a more relational ontology rooted in natality and vulnerability. It should also be noted that Ricoeur's philosophical hermeneutics has been extended by scholars like Bernard Dauenhauer, Richard Kearney, and Jean-Luc Almary, who emphasize the ethical implications of narrative refiguration and the embodied extended nature of selfhood, exploring how this also leads to a deeper affirmation of life. By drawing Arendt into this perspective, the ethical orientation of Ricoeur's work can be further expanded towards possibilities for a more radical novelty to emerge within the embodied, shared, and interrelated world, which offers also a deeper comprehension of the complexities of uniqueness. So existential thought has long taught us to look to death as the ultimate horizon of meaning, but I think that to think from birth is to think relationally and creatively, and also with love and hope. It is to recognize that our dependence stretches beyond the boundaries of ourself, and to affirm that while life is finite, limitations can open to further potentials. What this shows is that the self is not sovereign, but a being shaped in and through the world, and that this world can be changed through our actions. As Arendt reminds us, without the fact of birth, we would not even know what novelty is. So in this presentation, I have drawn on the work of Arendt and Ricoeur to argue that birth as an existential concept emphasizes the inherently relational nature of being, one that precedes and informs the anguish of death. Through Ricoeur, I suggested that by engaging with the concept of birth, we can deepen our understanding of relational life and explore how our identities are shaped in connection with others. This reframes the self as fundamentally dependent on others, thereby offering a heightened sense of responsibility. It also reveals how our self-narratives emerge through our relation to the world, grounded in our embodied and contextual existence. And it opens for a deeper affirmation of life through such uniqueness. While Arendt's concept of natality brings forth a powerful view of new beginnings rooted in plurality, Ricoeur situates identity and action within an interpretative embodied process that includes memory, trauma, and marginality. His view does not replace Arendt's, but it exposes its silences and deepens its existential implications, revealing how novelty might also emerge from hidden, wounded, or relational sites of meaning-making. On the other hand, Arendt's political existentialism further underscores how these complexities can culminate in novelty and a form of transformative action and meaningful change. However, this perspective of both Arendt and Ricoeur needs to be applied more to concrete, real scenarios for its possibilities and limitations to be tested. And I think Dr. Renzi gave a perfect example of what that could look like in her treatment of motherhood and the maternal narrative. But through the shared insights of Arendt and Ricoeur, we are invited to reimagine birth, not death, as a central existential focus of human life. This reorientation offers an integration between Ricoeur's embodied yes to life and Arendt's emphasis on natality and novelty. Together, their perspectives open new pathways for meaning, action, and hope.
Lovely. Many thanks, Sarah. Wonderful, interesting perspective on what I so appreciate about your paper is that I think it's really thinking sources together that is going to bring us forward. So many thanks. We'll have questions at the end.